Yo, it's Julian on the Brown Note and a review of The Smile, Wall of Eyes, my fastest ever turnaround on reviewing an album. The Smile are a completely pointless endeavour. I just don't know why they didn't just bring in the drummer Tom Skinner into Radiohead. I mean, I said when I reviewed their first album, A Light for Attracting Attention, a highlight from last year, or the year before. I think it was last year. I don't know now. It sounded like Radiohead making a much better version of The King of Limbs, which was probably their worst studio album since Pablo Honey. But that sort of thing, it's so analogously close to Radiohead, and all they've got is one member that isn't Radiohead. So I just don't understand why they don't make these Radiohead albums, because they would fit as Radiohead albums. There's such a narrow gap. Now, and it's Thom Yorke and Jonny Greenwood. Now, I did a piece on Pitchfork magazine, and it got a lot of attention for me, Billy Two Views. And I want to make an amendment to one of the things I said, which was that if you want to get best new music from Pitchfork and you're a white indie boy band, you have to have a female lead singer, like Big Thief or Dry Cleaning. I would amend that to say you have to have a female lead singer or be Thom Yorke. It's interesting that they've never let their love affair go. Although if the current crop of Pitchfork journalists continued, I'm sure in 5 years' time they'll be rescoring all the Radiohead albums and maintaining that Catatonia and Sleeper were the real heroes of 90s music. So I gave it a Light for Attracting Attention. Their first album came out in 2022, so it was 2 years ago. And I gave it a very strong review. I was behind the universal acclaim for it. The only problems I had, I thought that the second half was far stronger than the first, and it was quite episodic in that it sounded like individual tracks put together in a compilation more than a cohesive album, which I thought the second half of it was much better at. I listened to it again recently, and I would say that my appreciation for it has grown a bit. So a very, very good album. I think if I'm talking about the episodic nature of the first album and not cohesively gelling as an album as much as it could all the way through, then I think this album, Wall of Eyes, their second, has actually answered both those quite conclusively. So it opens with Wall of Eyes, the title track, acoustic strum. Got one of the sonic motifs throughout this album, which is quite appealing, is it's got this sort of cavernous and warm bassy feel when it comes to drums and bass, which makes the project feel quite warm and inviting for some reason. Almost sort of the same way that a Moon-Shaped Pool was quite woolly and inviting, and the vocals don't feel right, eerie synths going on. And another of the points on the album is the often relationship to krautrock, particularly on this track, Can, and the tropicalia of Future Days. I felt this is an album where it's not really as much about individual tracks standing out like the previous one, but more about the cohesive whole of the whole album. The second one, again, follows on with a sort of jazzy sway, tele-harmonic, almost into sort of Balearic house sort of zone I found myself. The only other track that I sort of thought was analogous to it was the live version of Everything in Its Right Place. And very rhythmic, complex rhythms and bass. Obviously this is a dream project for someone as nerdy as Jonny Greenwood. He's Read the Room. He's got this most angular guitar moment. It's the most Jonny album, I think, out of all of the Radiohead and analogous albums. Also, I've written down here Kashmir. I got a bit of a Kashmir drive. It's also got New, the krautrock legends, which is supposed to be pronounced Noi, but I always pronounce New because Noi sounds weird. New from krautrock, that's definitely a vibe. And also, again on this album, the more guitar-centric tracks off of Kid A. And Thom Yorke's voice is always blended in very well here. It's not completely in the background or foreground throughout. It is almost an instrument more than anything else. Under the Pillows, maybe the high point of the album at this stage. Johnny can be a little bit close sometimes when he's doing his wiggly stuff to Red Hot Chili Peppers, Can't Stop. And that's what I immediately thought of there. It's a bit more urgent. And the Most Can sounding, another krautrock legend. That's definitely what came from that midsection. And even the Falls LA track from This Nation's Saving Grace. Friend of a Friend's a lot more sort of whimsical in the verses, but then really sort of gets into this darker sort of almost like Pyramid Song choruses. I guess I don't know what I've written down there. I quoted a lyric, but I've actually can't read my own handwriting, sadly. Guess I believe in it looks like anal. I don't think that's right. I Quit has got a really strobing soundstage, very interesting. In some universes, these are all versions of the same song, and that's not to criticise the album at all. It's actually like everything is made out of, fragmented out of the same sort of colour palette or same sort of, you know, the same core elements just used in different ways. So I think that's shows how cohesive this album is. Tommy in this one almost reminded me of How to Disappear Completely, one of his most beautiful vocals. And as an album, it's, you know, as an art rock project, it's never austere or challenging in that way. I found it very immediate. I found it really did reach out straight away. I did mention that about the Feed the Ray project last year, which was my third best album of the year, about how I'd found her previous solo albums not to be that appealing. Because they were harder to love. You could admire the artistry, but I found that Radical Romantics was just immediate. It just grabbed me straight away. And I think this is quite an immediate album for an art rock project. The track Bending Heretic is the one thing that I really get annoyed about Radiohead, is why don't they do tracks like Bending Heretic more? A near 9-minute freak out, you know, an epic song. Something that absolutely wigs out. Why don't we get that more from them? So it's the centerpiece of the album. It's got sort of like a dreamy Fleetwood Mac Albatross instrumental vibe going on at the start for a few minutes before rising up. And when it starts going through this string rise, it reminded me of the astonishing track Love by Mika Levy, which is on which was one of my tracks of the century so far, which is the high point of her Under the Skin soundtrack. And then it goes into this full-blown guitar freak out. And I just wish they'd do it more. And I wish they'd gone on for another 5 minutes doing it here. But it's a fantastic... It's the culmination of an album. It's built to that moment. It's so well put together with the final track, You Know Me, is a lot more sort of like a coda. It's the drifting off of the album, and very classy and warm, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. So I think overall I prefer this immediately more than the first album. There aren't as many. Like 2 or 3 of the tracks from the first album are like for attracting attention were probably stronger than the individual tracks here, but the cumulative whole. I feel like this album is like in between Future Days by Can, Laughing Stock by Talk Talk, and A Moon-Shaped Pool by Radiohead, which is a pretty solid place to be. And a very strong album. For the Smile, Wall of Eyes, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. Good way to start the year.